glamorous on the surface, but behind it,
well, when you said earlier, the whole thing is to make it all seem effortless, seamless. The amount of work and pain that goes into that is extraordinary. I mean, if in those, well, I want to finish about the
let's go back to the adolescent.
So I would say, while Elizabeth Taylor or Jodie Foster or Roddy McDowall or whether they started, as tots, they didn't hit the brass ring until Elizabeth with National Velvet. So she was an early adolescent. I was an adolescent. Now that meant that you only had like 4 years, as opposed to the child who hit the brass ring at 5, like Margaret O'Brien or Shirley Temple. So that meant that child, if they hit the big time, had a 7-year span going. Now that's a huge success span to have. With that, then the parent becomes powerful, because the studio needs that commodity. So as Mrs. Temple was very powerful, because Shirley was a cartel. I mean, saved the studio. Deanna Durbin never was a child star. She was a phenomenal star. People forget. I mean, huge, saved Universal. But she was an adolescent. Now, the media and all these people, Freddie Bartholomew was a child star. All these people are lumped together. There's also a different awareness involved in the creature who becomes a household name at 5 and the one who becomes a household name at 13, 12 or 13. There's an entirely different mental process of it. Because if you've become that famous, like Shirley or like Coogan, or Baby Peggy Montgomery, who is a name that very few people know, was a huge child star, your whole adjustment to living is very different than somebody who becomes successful at 13.
Do you think that that's why so few of them really were able to play adult roles?
No, you see, that's another canard that is that the right word? Canard? Yeah. That's rubbish, you see, because so many of the people who were successful or working when they were children have been very successful as adults. Jodie Foster, Kurt Russell, Stephanie Powers, Elizabeth Taylor, Natalie Wood.
But they weren't real little. I'm talking about
Natalie,
Margaret O'Brien, Mickey Rooney.
Natalie Wood was 4. So Jodie Foster was tiny. Kurt Russell was a kid. It has many things go to alter one's need when they grow up. Some people just don't want to express themselves in that way. That's hard.
I'm only saying whether that was the studio, that maybe the studio so oversold them as children that it was almost impossible to make the leap, because the studios themselves.
But whether it's a child or an adult, the hardest thing to overcome is your own success. Because when you become enormously successful inside a decade, by the time the next decade comes, there's a new audience coming up. So the careers that really have become legendary are the ones that have re-established themselves in their second wind. For instance, Katharine Hepburn or James Stewart or Marlene Dietrich, or they're out for a while, and then suddenly some project comes along and John Travolta, it's happened with just now. It happened with Sean Connery. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all to people.